Everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Then you're going to have to change again.
Parshas Vayikra, page 544. I would like to make 4 points today. 4 points. That's it. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're finished. Number 1. As you know, the book of Shemot, the book that we completed last week, begins with the nation's experience in Egypt, ends off when they finally have this structure where they can welcome the presence of God, and this communication between Moshe Rabbeinu and the Almighty begins. So, the beginning of this week's portion, and the beginning of this book, is obviously going to describe the information transmitted, the information given by God to Moshe. And he calls Moshe. He calls him, he communicates with him. And therefore, it's a crucial and a very significant word, because it is God calling to the human being, and he starts providing him with information. Why specifically is the information about sacrifices when there are so many other things? Well, we'll get to that. But let's analyze the first word. The first word is Vayikra. He calls. What an honor for Moshe. We all notice the fact that the aleph is small, a small aleph. Very familiar with it. So there are those who are going to say that, listen, I could give you a rational explanation, because in almost every single case that there's a small letter at the end of the word, it is the exact same letter of the following word, meaning the first letter of the next word is El. So perhaps at some point it was written as one word, or perhaps they would write the letter to cover both words, and therefore they added at a letter point an aleph. That's what one would argue, but the rabbinic tradition tells us that's not so, that there is a reason for the smaller letter. The rabbis tell us that if there is a smaller letter, we are being told that you can actually, or you should, read this word without that letter as well. So we read it already with the Vayikra. God calls Moshe. Incredible. And now, approach number 2 is going to be Vayikar. Vayikar. What does that mean? Vayikar. What exactly does that mean? How do you deal with this word? How do you manage this word without the aleph? So we actually find Vayakar, that God, when he appeared to Bilam, remember Bilam? Bilam, the prophet who had such great potential and obviously did not fulfill it, the person that had charisma, the person that perhaps was a prophet, depends how we read exactly about his life, but obviously there was some form of communication between himself and God. And when God communicates with him, as described in Parshas Balak, God calls him, but he doesn't deserve a Vayikra. He doesn't deserve that. He's no Moshe. For him, it's Vayikar. Lashon, the shorish, the root, would be Mikre. In other words, the way the rabbis take it, is that this is not a calling that is one of worthiness. It is a calling that happens to occur. We'll have to explain that as well. But what is quite disturbing is the fact that here we are told, according to the rabbis, read this word. Obviously it is Vayikra, but read it as well as Vayikar, that use the appearance, use this relationship, use this word that describes God's appearance to Moshe with the word that is used that describes Bilam's interaction with God. Disturbing. So we are told the following, that you should know. That when you merit prophecy, as far as I know, I'm not dealing with prophets here today, but in the past, there were actually schools of prophecy. Schools of prophecy, not non-profit organizations, but these were profit organizations that they actually trained young people to reach levels of prophecy. What did they learn there exactly? Meditation. They meditated. Righteousness, because in our tradition you have to be a righteous person. Values. And those who, were on the upper, top 4%, reached perhaps prophecy, some level of prophecy. But prophecy in general matched the level of your preparation. You had the level of clarity of what's occurring in the spiritual realm based on how much you prepare yourself. The student who was diligent, who really focused on his meditations, practice every day for 45 minutes in the morning, afternoon, and in the evening, he is one that merits prophecy. The one who took it easy, was trying to find the shortcuts, the cliff notes, to figure out how to meditate, who took the coffee break every 15 minutes for meditation, he is the one that did not reach prophecy. Perhaps some level of clarity he had in the spiritual realm. Okay, this is an idea that we have, and we are still believers that although we don't have prophecy, there is still a concept that dreams have within it a level of prophecy. But the way the rabbis place it is that a dream has perhaps some prophecy, but you can have great difficulty on figuring out what of it is prophecy. So therefore, most of us, as far as I assume, I'm sure I'm not the only one that has stories of individuals who had dreams, and the dreams actually occur. I've told you the story of my father. I've told you the story that my father, and again, my father was a rational individual, and he shared with me an incredible story that he was 13 years old, and he wakes up one morning, and his older sister, the oldest sister, Nechame, comes over and says, Uzi, you won't believe what happened. In the middle of the night, I had a dream. Yeah, George remembers these things. I had this older sister, she was 21 at the time, my father is around 13, and she said, I had a dream, and I dreamt of two series of numbers, and in the dream, these were going to be the lottery. They had some local small lottery there in Montevideo. Two of the numbers that are the series of numbers that are going to be the winning tickets. I dreamt it. So my father says, no, so you're going to go buy it? And she said, well, am I crazy? It was a dream. Dreams are not, this is not, of course I'm not going to go buy it. I'm just telling you an interesting dream I had. So my father says, you remember the numbers? And she says, yeah, of course I remember. Can I have them? And she says, why not? And he takes those two numbers, he goes down to the street corner, this is Uruguay, so they don't ask you, the age is not significant. And one of the tickets actually won. Now, he didn't win millions, right? As I say, I wouldn't be here. I would be down in South Florida right now if that would be the case. But nevertheless, he won some money. It was significant money for a young kid. And his older sister took him to a Din Torah. They took him in front of the chief rabbi of Uruguay, who happened to be their father. And my father won. My father won it's an interesting halachic question, and I never seen a tshuva regarding such issues. So there is this concept that dreams, right? All of us have some interesting stories. I have some interesting stories, perhaps one that I could share, of dreams that seem to indicate that there's something happening. Prophecy is clarity, but you only are going to gain information based on how much you prepare yourself. That's what we are told. However, there are two individuals that received far more than what they deserved naturally. Two individuals that received far more than what they naturally deserved due to their preparations. One, of course, is Bilam. Bilam did not prepare himself. He did not prepare himself by becoming righteous, by focusing on values. He happened to receive, it was a mikra, he happened to receive prophecy due to the fact that there was a need that there would be a Gentile prophet. Moshe Rabbeinu receives prophecy. His prophecy is, indeed he merits prophecy, but not to the extent that he receives. When something occurs to you, and it is unexpected, that's a mikre. I'll give you an example. You are in shopping in No Frills, okay, and you find a box of tea for $2.50. That's not so shocking. In other words, you prepared yourself. You went to a store where there are indeed no frills, and you walk in, and they have their deals, and you could find yourself a decent tea for $2.50. Okay, that's not a mikre. That is, you prepare, you go to the right location, You find what you would expect to find. That's a normal experience. However, if you go to Bayview Village and you go into Fusateris and you find there a good tea for $2.50, now give me a call, because that's a mikre. That's a mikre. That's not something you expect. You don't expect to find that there. And Vayikra, mikre, is Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu. So now what we are being told here is that you should know, when you read this first word, yes, God communicates with him, indicates the significance of the individual on the closeness Moshe Rabbeinu has to the Almighty. But it is also telling you that this man Moshe merits far more than what he deserves. The greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu is not he himself, but rather due to the fact that he is a messenger and a leader of the people of Israel. This is a very important rule in Judaism, that we always value more the people more than the leader. The greatness of a leader, or the merits of the leader, and the merits that Moshe Rabbeinu has this ability to communicate with God and have a clarity that remains for eternity. All other prophets had clarity. The clarity was limited for their time. They couldn't make an adjustment on the level of clarity that Moshe Rabbeinu has. In whose merit does Moshe have it? That is because he is the man who represents the people of Israel. And the greatness of Israel is not the leader, but it is the people. It's an important rule to remember. B'schut Israel, we are always told that it is always in the merit of the people of Israel. It's interesting, in the United States now, people are following the news. And there was, in one of these Trump rallies, which the news is bombarding us with this nonsense, but in one of them they pledged allegiance to vote for him. They actually did so. They pledged allegiance to vote for Trump. And this is very, very disturbing for anyone who understands what the United States or what progression is, that we no longer, pledge allegiance to a leader. We pledge allegiance, to a country. We value the people. The people are far greater than the specific leader. When the leader thinks that he is greater than the people, that's when we are asking for real trouble there. So this is something that is quite disturbing, and as Jews, we have the same idea. There's something special. There's something special about Klal Yisrael, right? And we have to always be careful that just as we, respect our leaders, we have to respect the people of Israel. It's a problem that we have, that we like sharing jokes about Jews. I'm not the only one guilty of sharing jokes about Jews. And there's a little problem there because, and I think, again, we do it because, we feel comfortable enough with ourselves. But at the same time, there is something special about Klal Yisrael. Remember that, because it is due to that fact that Moshe Rabbeinu merits a Vayikra, mikre, that he happens to get far more than what he expected. That is actually part number 1 of the class. I mentioned there are 4. This is number 1, and now we're going to move on to number 2. This section deals with sacrifices. Sacrifices we've touched upon many times, the difficulty in understanding them. We always quote the opinion of Maimonides, that Maimonides tells us, listen, the people needed it at that time. They couldn't connect to spiritual concepts or a spiritual entity without sacrifices, so therefore it was given to them. Fine. And therefore there is a key word that appears. Look at verse 3, which starts on page 544, and it begins describing a specific type of offering. An offering called an olah, an offering of elevation. So it is brought from cattle. It should be an unblemished male. And then we are told on page 546, it should be brought to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Don't tell the Kohen, by the way, I have this animal waiting. You could go ahead and get it, but rather you have that responsibility of bringing it to the tent of meeting. Obviously, what the Torah wants you is not just to give a sacrifice, but to interact with the Kohen. Interact with the righteous people. Go to the city of righteousness. Go to Yerushalayim. Be inspired by the values of Yerushalayim. So it is not there just as a token. It is there as a hook. It wants you to be attracted to that location and learn values and concepts there. And then we are told that you bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting. Yakriv oto. It should be offered. And this is the key word I want to focus on. Lirtzono. Let's read that again. Liritzono lifnei Hashem. It should be offered liritzono. How would you translate ritzono? So some would say, well, or as the Art Scroll does, voluntarily. It should be done with a ratzon. It should be done with a desire. Don't bring it because you are forced. Bring it with a desire. Fine. Others translate it as to be acceptable. Meaning, not that you should bring it in a way that it should be not under duress, but rather it should be in an acceptable way. Bring sacrifice in an acceptable way. What does that mean? So here we're going to work with the following. There is something that we could call stand-alone mitzvot. We're going to call them the SAMs, stand-alone mitzvot. Mitzvot that have value on their own, with no intention at all. Even if it doesn't lead you to anything else, you are even perhaps not even mindful of it, that's considered an excellent and valuable mitzvah. Okay, it's a SAM, stand-alone mitzvah. Stand-alone mitzvot, the perfect example is, of course, tzedakah. A person could be giving charity with absolutely no knowledge that it is occurring. It's considered a valuable act. How do I know that? Because later in Parashat Kedoshim, later in the Chumash, we are told that if you have a field and a few sheaves of wheat fall, you're collecting your bundles, and a few sheaves of wheat fall down, you're not aware of it. The poor person comes and collects, it's theirs, and you have a credit of a tremendous good deed. No intention at all, wonderful mitzvah there. Mission accomplished. Now this is actually fundamental, that you should not be doing mitzvot, right, that are between man and between humans with too much kavanah. Be careful, because the intention, in other words, if let's say I want to go ahead and do something spiritual, I want to go ahead and shake the lulav. So before I shake the lulav, I'm going to meditate a few minutes there, and I'm going to think I am going to fulfill a mitzvah. God commands me to do so. I am connecting to my Creator by shaking the lulav. Good thing to do. When it comes to a mitzvah like charity, at times, having too much intention could actually damage the mitzvah. And what do I mean by that? Coming Purim next week. So we perform during the day a few mitzvot. For example, we have a seudat Purim. It's a nice mitzvah. We get together, we have a meal. Everyone's invited, by the way, to 95 Char, to Miriam and I invite the Kehillah from 2:15 to 4:45, as you see in the bulletin. Okay, it's not going to be a Seudas Purim. There'll be some wonderful things there, but it's a mitzvah. You have a Seudat Purim. Number 2, another mitzvah of the day. Mishloach manot. Nice mitzvah, you send to. And then there is matanot le'evyonim, the gifts to the poor. Familiar with them? Now, we are going to perform this mitzvah after not doing it for a year. One would expect, or one could wonder, why do we not make a shehechianu? Shehechianu v'kimanu v'gianu lazman hazeh. Right? My kids, our teenagers, been waiting for Purim a long time. Right? They're already dreaming of how they could somehow get their hands on a little bit of alcohol. That's what kids do in this day and age, unfortunately. So why don't they make a shechianu? They've been waiting for this, right? At least one of them, more than waiting for the Tkiyah Shofar, right? And Tkiyah Shofar has a shechianu. Why not the fact that he could have So the authorities deal with it, and they come up with a solution. Listen to the solution mentioned, that in the morning, when we read the Megillah, we're going to make a shechianu for the morning reading of the Megillah as well. When we make that shechianu, have in mind that you are covering the mitzvot of the day. Sounds good, sounds safe. That's what they recommend. What's interesting to note is that the saintly Chafetz Chaim, when he gives us a list of mitzvot to be mindful of, to have in mind when we make the shechianu, he notes Mishloach Manot, he notes Seudat Purim, but he doesn't tell us that we should have in mind the Matanot Le'evyonim. That is not included. Some wonder why. And the explanation given is, imagine the following scenario. Imagine if indeed a person, when they make their shechianu in the morning, they have in mind that they're going to be giving the gifts to the poor. And imagine if that would be the practice, you are on your way to shul, and someone who is actually in financial need comes over to you before davening. And he says, I need a gift, it's Purim, I need to buy myself food. And you say to them, I would love to give you, but I have a problem. I didn't make the shechianu yet. In other words, I want to make some kind of blessing over it, so I can't give it to you now, but perhaps in an hour and 30 minutes I could give it to you. What are you doing there? You are basically, due to your commitment, to the concept of intention, kavanah, brachot, being mindful of God, you are not taking care of the need of a human being. That is not the way to perform acts that are between humans. It's an interesting story. There was a specific rabbi who was in the hospital, and another rabbi comes in to visit him, and the visiting rabbi says to him, okay, I'm happy that I'm able to fulfill my mitzvah by visiting you. And the rabbi in the bed responds, I'm not your lulav, I'm not your esrog. In other words, you are basically treating me like an object. And it's a problem when we go ahead and take a mitzvah, and the mitzvah is to connect to a person. You actually should not be mindful of God. Your focus should be the need of the individual. Figure out, just as you use your depth to understand Talmudic text, use your insight to figure out what that person needs. Sometimes the person needs a good joke. Sometimes the person needs a tear. You have to focus on the need of the individual. That is the requirement of that time. That's what that's what you should be focusing on. And I'm going to label it a stand-alone mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that, again, you could fulfill it by tzedakah falling out of your pocket and the finding it. So too, you could fulfill it no kavanah at all. That's category number one. Stand-alone mitzvah. Then there are all other mitzvot. It is ideal to have kavanah. So I'm going to give you three categories. Category 2, mitzvot, for example, making kiddush, tefillah. The list is very, very long. Ideally, you should be thinking of the fact, be mindful that by performing this mitzvah, I am fulfilling and connecting to the Creator of the world. However, post facto, even without that intention, the mitzvah has its value. Okay, those are the two categories so far. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to korbanot, when a person brings a korban and is not mindful of the message, of the reason, of why it is done, of what he is trying to achieve, that is considered worthless or worse. There's a statement that the Talmud makes that if a person is mitasek bekodashim, meaning he is involved in either slaughtering the animal or offering it or any of the services that are going to be described in this week's portion, but you are not focused on what you are doing, so we are told that it is pasul. It is not valid. And that seems to be telling us not just that the action is not valid, the individual, this is not a valid behavior. If you're not lirtzono, if you're not focused, if you're not doing it in a way that you are mindful of what you are trying to achieve, it is something that is worthless and very dangerous, because suddenly it could become a justifier. You could have people, and this is a problem that the prophets addressed, that you had people who were corrupt in the marketplace, people who were not sensitive to one another. They did not take care of the need of the orphan, of the widow, but when it came to a sacrifice, they were always more than happy to bring one. The prophets tell us it is something I don't want. Mi bikesh zot meyadchem remos chatzerai. Why walk through my courtyard? Why come to the temple if you are not learning the message, if you are not mindful of the idea of the purpose of these sacrifices? It is the worst thing. It is something that should not be done, period. This is what the prophets tell us. And that is the idea with the word liritzono. It's interesting. There was a thinker that noted that if you look at Parshas Vayikra, there are, in the beginning of the portion, and in the middle of the portion, and at the end of the portion, there is a message that if you take funds from others when you do not have the right to do so, right, you are not an ethical being. But let's point them out. Turn to page 544. And Rashi in the second verse wonders, why is it that when we are talking about a person who brings a sacrifice, Why does the text tell us that it is a man, Adam? Adam. It could have said Ish, right? Yisrael. Why Adam? So there's a beautiful rabbinic reading here. The Rashi shares with us, Lama, why does it say Adam? Because just as Adam Harishon, the first human, Lo hikriv min hagezel, he never offered anything that belonged technically to someone else because there was no one else. So too, when you bring a sacrifice, be sure that it is not from stolen property. Statement number one. In the middle of the portion, we are actually told that when you offer a bird, you have to go ahead and get rid of the crop. The rabbis tell us why. When you bring an animal, the food that was given to the animal was given from the owner, owned by the owner. There is no gezel, there's no stolen property. When it comes to a bird, you know how birds work. The birds, they have their freedom and they're going to go ahead and eat whatever they find. To remember this concept that being lacking sensitivity towards the property of others is destructive, that's why, what do? You remove the crop of the bird. And so too at the end of this week's portion. At the end of this week's portion we are told, and the last section is that you should, if a person steals something, bring a korban. So he points out, this is the Kli Yakar, one of the commentators that appears in many of the Chumashim. In the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the portion we are being told, the message of korbanot, don't let it stand alone. Don't let, God forbid, korbanot remain as a portion, as an activity that you do and you move on. Be mindful of the message, and therefore the message, it's reiterated in this portion. Be sensitive to the property of others. The whole purpose of korbanot, it's a hook to bring you to Jerusalem, to learn true ethics of Judaism, true values of Judaism. It was necessary to be given these laws simply because there is no other way to bring them to a spiritual teaching, a spiritual structure without them. But this is message number 2. So the message number 2 would be, to sum it up, be sure that korbanot are never treated as a stand-alone mitzvah. It is quite relevant for us as well in this day and age. It could be relevant to coming to a synagogue, right? You come to a synagogue, you get called up to the Torah, right? Or for men, or you come for prayer. To believe that that's the essence of Judaism, it's absurd. It's simply absurd. You could have a Jew, right, who, comes to the synagogue, involved in their activities, but in the marketplace is a crook. Is that Judaism? Right? When external actions become the way you identify a Torah Jew, you have some serious problems because it becomes a justifier. Obviously, these things are valuable, but it's supposed to be that you understand the whole message of what the teachings. Don't treat it like a stand-alone mitzvah. So that is message number 2. Message number 3 of this week's portion. I want you to turn, please, to page 560. I always like sharing the story how my brother in Baltimore, how there was a time when he was in yeshiva in South Florida, and they would send them Shabbos to this old shul where they had 9 people and one guest every week. And these older individuals would tell them stories that the shul was built with mafia money. And they had stories how Bugsy Siegel or Mayor Lansky would get aliyahs on Shabbos and send their Italians on Sunday to pay up for Mishaberas. Right? As I love mentioning that on a Sunday, the Italians would get a list, what you do for Lansky and Siegel. That, kill so-and-so, beat up so-and-so, and pay up for my Mishabera. That is what, and it's a problem that exists. It's something that it justifies. And, we're in a world that people do need money, institutions need money. And to stand up to such people is not easy. And it's a sad reality that does exist, that we have elements of Judaism that justify and allow us to do what we want. That's not what Judaism is about. It's the danger of korbanot. And it could be, I mentioned it, going to pray at graves. You go to pray at a grave, there's a right way to do it. Learn up about the person, read about their practices, their righteousness, and go there and meditate and connect to the spirit of that individual perhaps, or pray to the Almighty because it's terrain that's sanctified. that has its place in Judaism. But to believe that that's something holy that you do, and in Israel this is a struggle that exists, that they have stories that someone found the soap of a specific holy rabbi and they believe that by using it they'll be taking care of issues. I mean, there's a little bit of a danger there because you have to keep what the rational parts of Judaism. It cannot become a justifier. And this is what the Torah and the prophets cry out over and over again, but it's time for our third message today. In chapter 5, we're talking about a situation of a person who has information, is told to testify, but he doesn't. So the verse tells us, and again, it's a very specific case, the way the rabbis read it. You have a nefesh, a person that sins. He accepts to make an oath, but he doesn't do so. So let's read the last half of the verse. Im lo yagiv, if he does not testify the way he committed himself to, nasa avono, he should bear his sin. So, a very basic message. You know something, you have the obligation in many cases to say something. Fine. Now, someone will tell me, are you not familiar with the laws of Lashon Hara? Valid question. When do I say, when do I not say? So the same, if we look later in the book of Vayikra, the verse that tells us not to speak Lashon Hara, in the same verse, or immediately afterwards, we are told, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand by the blood of your fellow. In other words, if you see someone that their blood is being spilled, or that their business or their life is coming apart, you have no right to be silent. You have to share information to protect someone. So you have to have this proper balance of not talking when it's not necessary. You could destroy people with rumors, but at the same time, you have absolutely no right to not say anything. And this is one of those difficulties in Judaism. In many areas, you could be machmer, right? You have a question if to eat matzah this amount or this amount. So what do most of you do? You're machmer, you eat the bigger amount, right? That is fine. Not terrible, it may hurt your stomach, but you'll survive. When it comes to this question, someone calls me and they ask me a question about a specific individual. When it comes to shidduch or business, it's a very challenging situation. I say too much, I'm an awful person. I don't say enough, I'm an awful person. This is not easy. What are the guidelines? And the reason I really mention it is because, they just had in the news that they were, the final report for the German wings crash last year. A German pilot by the name of Andreas Lubitz was a co-pilot. He suffered from depression. So, the traditional way of law laying a person dealing with it is killing themselves, which is a tragedy. But it seems to be that a German, go explain why he had to go ahead and kill himself, but take another 150 innocent people with him, which is a cruelty, but it's an illness, perhaps. But what is fascinating is the fact that a whole series of doctors were aware of it, right? And it is incredible to know that he was referred to a hospital to treat him for psychosis, a psychiatric hospital. This is a person that should have not been in a cockpit. But what is it? Germany, because my brother explained to me that it cannot happen in the United States or Canada, because here we do share such information with the FAA. There are guidelines. Germany is extremely sensitive to issues of privacy, due to Nazi Germany, due to the Stasi that knew exactly every single time, you flush the toilet because half the country was employed by the East German secret police. So now in the new Germany, it's very much like the government's not allowed to know anything. Government's not allowed to know anything. So these doctors and psychiatrists know about a guy that is suffering from severe depression, and he is a co-pilot, but Tormenish Zogin, you're not allowed to say anything. So it was something that it's terrifying, it's very, very sad, but I want to give you a few guidelines. These are general guidelines, and believe me, I've processed them many, many times. What to say, what not to say. Number one, right? You get a question, can I enter into a business partnership with such an individual? And I know that there's a long list, the history is long with this individual, not with this current name, but with an old name that he used, right? So what do? So number one, you only share relevant information. Right? The person is curious, you're not allowed to share anything that is not relevant. Very logical. You know who's the person that gets credit for really establishing the system of what is said and what not? The Chafetz Chaim. The saintly Chafetz Chaim, he wrote a book, and his book is not a book of don'ts, it's a book of hows. There are times that you have to share information. Let me tell you how to do it. Number two, there should never be a personal agenda. In other words, imagine there's someone that drives me crazy, and I know some flawed information about him. And then I'm asked a question, and I do have to technically share. Here, what Judaism and ethics demand for me is to overcome my feelings towards him, and to be sure that the fact that I'm agitated by that individual has zero impact on the information I give. There's a demand there, but that's what Judaism wants. Now, it has to be also that you know that person will not publicize it to others, and that's a challenge there. In other words, someone calls, about a shidduch, and I know that there's an issue there. But I also know that if I tell that person on the other end of the line, they're going to go ahead and tell 16 other people. How do I deal with this? Well, you think it's easy? You have a solution, anyone? Still looking. But there are times that what you have to say is simply something like, it's just not a match. Why? It's just not a match. But why? And the answer is going to be, it's just simply not a match. You have to try to prevent it, but without sharing the information. There are other guidelines as well, but just to make you aware, Lashon Hara is destructive. There is no question that people's careers, lives, social life are destroyed at times when people say the wrong thing to the wrong person, even when there is good intention. But the passive approach of Im Lo Yagid has no place in Judaism as well. And good luck with the balance, because I'm still not sure how to do it. Fourth point today. Fourth point, page 1214. What am I looking at page 1214? Haftorah. What's this week's Haftorah? So we read Parshas Zachor, and we read the tragedy of this charismatic, tall individual. I'm not sure why it's considered such a great thing that he's tall. Some great people achieve things without height. Nevertheless, our tradition talks about Shaul, he's a tall fellow. Big deal. But nevertheless, right? See, that's what happens when you have personal feelings. Everything comes out. So now, but Shaul, the bottom line is that he had humility. He wasn't interested in power. There were obviously qualities there. But here when he is given a mission to wipe out a nation, and he was supposed to have the faith and understand that long term this is necessary, his mercy makes its appearance in the wrong place. He has mercy, he feels bad wiping out a whole nation. Perhaps he didn't have to feel so bad, but he leaves the king that he shouldn't have. A very interesting Haftorah that he is told to fulfill a specific task, does not fulfill it, and as a result loses his position of being the king of Israel for him and for his children. It's a great loss. Now, they are supposed to wipe out the nation of Amalek. We are very familiar with them because they attacked the people of Israel for absolutely no reason. They are ones who are not just fighting and don't just carry a hatred towards the Jews, but carry a hatred towards the Jewish message. The Jewish message at the time of the Exodus is that something incredible occurred. A nation left Egypt. It never has happened. These are people that obviously have some kind of goal. They're teaching us something. Let's try to learn from them. That should have been the appropriate reaction to the Exodus. Amalek sees it as something that's random. They happen to succeed. And therefore the Amalekites in the wilderness felt that they're going to prove to the world that this is not a supernatural nation because we're going to attack them. And even if we fail, but we will show that at least they are just like everyone else. They fight in the battlefield like anyone else. Amalek becomes the symbol of evil, and an established kingdom of Israel is told to wipe them out. That is what we read about in the Haftarah. Now, in verse 6, we are told the following. And this seems to have absolutely nothing to do with the big picture. In verse 6 comes Shaul. Shaul is preparing for war. And he turns to those who are known as the Kenites, the Keni. And he turns to this group, and you can imagine them as shepherds or Bedouins. And he turns to them and he says, listen, where we are going to have a fight in this valley, you are present, but we have nothing against you. So if you don't mind, can you please pack out? And he says to them, Lechu suru redu mitoch Amalek. Separate yourself from the Amalekites. Because, when you go to war, the reality is in every battlefield, innocent people are going to die. That's the reality of warfare. And you, the Keni, you did a chesed, you did acts of kindness with the children of Israel when they left Egypt. So, the Keni hears it, they leave. Who are these Keni that did acts of kindness to the Israelites? So what are we told? If you look throughout Tanakh, they are actually the descendants of Jethro, Yitro. Fine. When they are going to attack Amalek, who do they interact with? They interact with... When they are going to destroy Amalek, they are going to interact with the descendants of Yitro. What's fascinating is that if you look at Yitro's arrival in the wilderness in the beginning of Parashat Yitro, right beforehand, what does the Torah describe? The battle and the attack of Amalek. They go hand in hand. You have Amalek, Yitro. This is how it appears in the Chumash. And here too, you have a war against Amalek. So what's mentioned here? Be sure to give the option, be sure to inform the descendants of Yitro that they are not impacted. What's the relationship between the two? If you ask the question today, what are we to learn from the Holocaust? What are we to learn from the Holocaust? Go online. Go to the website of the United States Holocaust Museum. And the lesson is going to be about, tolerance, the fact that racism, stereotype, develop an awareness, the pluralism. These are going to be the message of the Holocaust. Now, obviously, if that is going to be the message of the Holocaust, we haven't learned anything. As Jews, especially, we should know that if the Holocaust was there to uproot the Jewish people and the Jewish message, so what should we do? We should strengthen ourselves in Jewishness, right? Celebrate the fact that there are more Jews. Celebrate that there is a homeland for Jews. Celebrate that there are Jews involved in what Judaism is about, which is Torah and mitzvos. That's what should be the way to deal and learn, indeed, from the Holocaust. Amalek is a nation that is to uproot the Jewish message. Yitro hears about the attack of Amalek. How does he deal with it? He deals with it by running to the Jewish people, joining them, being inspired by them. He understands that if there is an attack of such hatred against the Jews and their message, the only way to learn from it, the proper response is to learn the Jewishness, the Jewish message, become part, support the Jewish people. And there are many, many righteous Gentiles in the world today, in the thousands and the millions, that support the state of Israel and support the Jewish people because they understand what we went through. And they could get up and they say, after the darkness of the Holocaust, look what they achieved. And these are people that understand there's something Jewish that has to be learned from the Holocaust. And that is symbolized by Yitro versus Amalek. In this portion, you are uprooting Amalek. Remember the righteousness and remember the kindness of Yitro. And that is kindness, to understand that if they want to uproot something, you go ahead and give them that encouragement. When you visit the Yad Vashem, you visit the new Yad Vashem. So we've all, I remember the old Yad Vashem, which was perhaps moving, but you can't compare it to the new Yad Vashem. So we've been there. And the architecture is moving, the displays are moving. But we all know that when you come out, those walls that make you feel that you are closed in, they open. And you see the magnificent mountains of Yerushalayim, and you see houses, and it's basically, there's a message there, that yes, there was a darkness of the Holocaust, but there's a future to the people of Israel. There's a future. Now, I believe that perhaps what could be placed, I don't know if right there, maybe down the stairs, are two screens, two big screens. One screen perhaps should have footage of Jewish children being born throughout the world. Like every day, there should be perhaps a list of pictures of Jewish children being born, that you should feel that there is a future to Klal Yisrael. And perhaps the next screen should have people with Twitter could go ahead and send in acts of kindness that occur in Israel or throughout the world that are due to the fact that Jews are being kind to one another due to the values of Jewish tradition. Or that Torah is being taught a Torah of kindness, meaning to see that there's Judaism that is alive. Right? That should be the message. After seeing the darkness of Amalek, you have to walk away with the message of Yitro. The message of there is a Jewish message should be what the Holocaust is about. And if Jews ignore the Jewishness of the Holocaust, you know what's going to happen? Well, it happened already. That the Holocaust is suddenly going to be used as a tool against the Jews. And it's being done today. When you hear about comparisons, those who are comparing in the left, the Israeli soldiers and the occupation to what the Nazis were doing. These are words that are uttered today. And you ask yourself, how on earth can this happen within 70 years? Right? It makes absolutely no sense at all. Well, if you don't take the Jewishness, the Jewish message, something that we should really develop pride in your tradition, pride in your people, strengthen your people, support your people, all right? Then you're going to go ahead and deal with the tragedies of a Holocaust. It's not just ignored, but actually as a tool against us. Yitro is that hero. Because Yitro is a hero, and by the way, he merited that the portion that describes the revelation, the portion that tells us what Judaism is, a nation that experienced revelation, is Parashat Yitro, because he learns from Amalek, he learns from the Nazis, he learns from the Holocaust. He learns that you got to make it as Jewish as you can. And that's what we are achieving when you talk about the Jewish nation, the growth that's occurring. You talk about construction in Israel, yeshivot, institution, kindness. The news, unfortunately, doesn't cover it, which is a tragedy, that the news only covers the negative. But the thousands of acts of kindness that are done on a daily basis by Jews in the land of Israel, based on Jewish values, they are occurring every single minute. And you read stories of people who name their children for victims of terror. People they didn't know them. They have absolutely nothing to do, but they feel we're one nation. They suffer. Their suffering is my suffering. There's going to be continuity for the victim through my new child. That is what Judaism is about, and that's the Hemshech. That's the only message that should be learned from the Amalek, and Yitro is indeed the one that learned it, and therefore he is referred to in this Haftarah. That's the fourth point. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. And have a wonderful day. We'll see you B'ezrat Hashem next week.